Welcome to our live event today. We are going to be discussing inviting or having other roles other than developers in our ensemble time. So, we'll be talking about what value BAs, QAs, project managers, product people can provide to us when developing software. So, just quick introductions. We'll go around. I'm Penny. I've been with Industrial Logic a little over 3 years. And in fact, most of my time has not been a developer. It's been in one of these other three roles, whether it's a business analyst, a QA, project manager, and even a little bit on the product side. So we'll move on. Cody, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Cody Fintech. I have been in Industrial Logic for about 2 years. Software code crafter. Yeah. Take it away, John.
All right, John Fazaro. I've been with Industrial Logic about the same as these two fine folks, but I've been writing code for about 20-something years, 22 years, and I think some days I almost have the hang of it. So.
Awesome. Why don't we just start off with talking about what is ensemble working? What do we mean when we talk about ensemble working?
Mm-hmm.
I think the official definition goes something like all the brilliant minds in the same place on the same computer working on the same problem together.
Yeah.
So it's fairly, if you haven't encountered this before, it's fairly counterintuitive way to do any kind of work, especially knowledge work. If you consider like we're taking everybody's keyboard away, not only that, we're just making them all. It sounds like we're just making people stand around and watch one person work.
Mm-hmm. But it really is to that. Who are all the right people that are required to actually go from starting something to finishing something? And by finishing, we mean getting that in the hands of the users.
Yep.
Yeah. And we can get into the mechanics maybe later if we need to, but the essential mechanic is that the person who's at the keyboard, that nothing actually goes from their brain into the computer directly. If you want something to get from your brain into the computer, it has to go through somebody else's hands. So the driver is taking direction from the other people in the room. So that kind of ensures that there's at least a communication about everything that's done during the work.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty comfortable. I mean, it's pretty comfortable, I think, for developers. Hey, that makes sense. And if I'm working as a developer and writing code, like I can see how that's be super helpful. But what about these other roles, the business analysis, the QA or tester, the product manager? Like, what do they bring to the table? Like, typically in waterfall, we see these roles a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that they can bring to the table, or what is it about those roles that fit into ensemble working?
Well, I think there's kind of an essential part of doing knowledge work with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the essential piece. This is kind of obvious, but I'm breaking it down because we're going to be talking about different ways to solve the same problems. We have meetings, we have documentation, we have communication tools, and the basic problem of knowledge work is getting the knowledge and the work from one brain into another, so that the people on the team who are doing the work together can kind of can share that mental model of what we're doing. And we've been, obviously, as long as knowledge work has been a thing, we've been doing this. We have meetings, we have documentation, we have all these accoutrement of knowledge work, and these roles that we're talking about: business analyst, quality analyst, project manager, product manager, whatever however you expand those acronyms. These are all roles that aid in a certain way in
Mm-hmm.
helping the team to share information so that they can work together.
Yeah. I know when I was a business analyst, like one of my big things was I had to think way far ahead. Like I had to think big picture, and I had to think about where we wanted to be way in the future, and
Mm-hmm.
then try to figure out how do I slice and dice this to give work to the developers, right? To be able to build what we want them to build. And
Yeah.
so, often as a BA, you're thinking end game. Developers are thinking current now. How do I build this?
Yeah.
And from a QA perspective, you're thinking, how how can I break it? How can I tell the developers that they're wrong?
Yeah. And product manager, project manager is sitting there like, how can we get the whole orchestra playing together? How do we make sure people show up in the right place at the right time? And, you know, how does the timeline make sense?
Yeah.
For all this work that has to be done. And there's a lot of emphasis put on planning, I think, for all three of those roles. I mean, if you think about like what would a software team be like without those roles, might be a helpful way to show what value they have.
Yeah.
And I imagine herding cats is sort of the brief description of what you'd have going on.
The other thing that I think these three roles really like is predictability and low change.
Yeah.
Right. So BAs are like, I want to tell everything up front, what it is that I want the system to do. I'm going to document it. I'm going to give you as much detail as I possibly can to ensure that nothing goes wrong. QA says, I want you to give me something finished that I can hammer out and hammer on. Don't change it on me in the middle of things.
Yeah.
Particularly because then I get lost and confused and I don't know what it is and where I am. And then for PM, it makes my job really hard if there's a lot of change, or I have to manage changing deadlines, or tell somebody they aren't going to get what they think they're going to get. So, you know, these roles like a lot of stability.
Yeah. So if we're say working on a project that we think it's gonna take about 6 months, what we want to have is a really solid plan for how those 6 months are going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as possible, we don't want anything to change that plan.
Yep.
That usually works, I'm pretty sure. That's why we're all here talking about an alternative.
Yeah, my irreverent laugh was kind of the essential nature of knowledge work of any kind, especially software engineering, software development, is that as you touch it, as you do the work, new information flies off faster than you can catch it. And so sort of trying to solidify a 6-month plan or a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan or even a 1-month plan usually ends up with a lot of BAs, QAs, and PMs being frustrated.
Yep.
Not to mention the engineers.
And users.
Yep.
Right. Things are going to change. New information's going to come up. And, you know, these roles do a lot of great work in a kind of a large batch software workflow. They do a lot of work to catch that information and bring it back in and organize it so that the team can stay together even when things are changing.
Yeah.
So I think now I guess we could talk about putting these two things together though. So when we do ensemble working, why do we do that?
Goes back to your definition. We want to stop starting work and to start finishing work. So it really is the right people in the room that can make the work complete are in the ensemble. And that isn't just developers, like we're saying. It's BA, QA, PM, DevOps, basically anybody in the way of making something from start to complete. They should be in the room. They should be in the ensemble.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think also preventing rework or waste comes up, right? So like I'm a business analyst. I just spent maybe 6 months, 7 months doing all the analysis and talking with all the people to build up all this documentation to hand over to the developer, and then find out we've got to go back to the drawing board, right? That's a lot of work that just got tossed out. And that's frustrating. I mean, when you see that much work get thrown away. And ensemble working helps solve that, right? Because we can just take what do we know right now that the system needs to do. We can do something super small and figure that piece out without having to think too far down the road.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of this comes up in meetings, and we have regular meetings in any project, however you're doing it, because we have to transfer this information and handle the new things that come up and organize it. And it's ironic that the one thing that will destroy all of your meetings and get them off of your calendar is if you just have one big meeting and do the work in it.
Yep.
And that's ensembling. So we're taking this, potentially months of planning and shrinking it down. Can we do that shorter? Can we do 1 month? Can we do 2 weeks? Can we do 1 week? Okay, what if we did 1 day? Okay, what if we just all did it all of the time while we were doing the work? It's sort of turning that dial all the way down to how small of a batch can we produce. And I think Cody has a story about why doing larger batches, even it doesn't matter who, the people in the room, maybe even the company that is doing this kind of work really would care about not doing a large batch.
Yeah, large batches, which create large feedback loops, and large feedback loops are detrimental to your product. So yeah, if folks haven't heard, there's this video game Concord that came out. It was a live service game released by Sony, and it was shut down only 12 days after it was released. And it was shut down because the team had a culture problem. It had less than 1,000 concurrent users and less than 25,000 units were sold. In video games, that's a very, very small number. It was also estimated to have cost Sony over $250 million over the course of 6 years. This fantastic video that I watched by Laura Fryer, she broke this down and she diagnoses it again as this culture problem related to this broken feedback loop between the Concord team and its players. And really, the major issue is by the time Concord released, the market changed. 6 years, that 6 years of batching work is such a long feedback loop, and the market changed completely. So Concord was kind of influenced by this game called Overwatch that made over $1 billion in revenue in the first year. And so everybody was trying to make their own Overwatch, Sony being one of them. But the problem was, like when Overwatch came out, it was $40. But once Concord came out, Overwatch 2 was already out, went to a free-to-play game. The market changed. Their direct competitor is literally free-to-play. They're releasing a game that's $40. Sounds like they were not listening to the market or listening to the players. And here's another direct quote from a player of the game from Steam. They said, "Who is the target audience of this game? Nothing about it makes sense. The characters are horrific to look at. The graphics seem subpar. The dialogue is terrible. The market's saturated. Who is this game made for?" So it is clear that Concord, they didn't get the feedback or they didn't act upon the feedback from real users. And how many times have we seen that happen where it's clear that a product was released without actually talking to real users. Maybe somebody planned, oh, yep, it needs to have the software needs this feature. The software needs that feature. It really is creating quality software really is engaging. And it's not just the users, it's the whole team. QA, BA, PM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they probably had a really nice plan internally.
Oh yeah.
But it would cost them a lot less money if they had gotten something out to users sooner in a smaller way.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like at this point we've talked about the roles and we've sold people on smaller batches and ensemble. But again, if it's mostly developers doing the work of software engineering, what is a business analyst going to do in there? If the developers already know what they're going to do, what analysis would the business analyst do? If they haven't finished the software yet, what would the tester test? And what would the PM do in terms of organizing the information and things? How do these roles show up? Maybe we could address them one at a time.
That's a good idea.
Okay. So what would a business analyst do in a mob of developers in an ensemble?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the business analyst, I want to actually understand how are the developers kind of thinking about breaking this down and approaching it. I typically am going to have, as a BA, going to have a bigger picture in mind. So the developers are going to be down there in the weeds doing things whether business analyst is going to be at a lot higher level. Sometimes I think a business analyst can say, hey, are you sure we want to go down that road right now? Is there some other direction that we can take this, right? And so I think that's one of the big things that the business analyst can bring into the group, is keeping the big picture in mind and not following the rabbit trails that might come up within the code.
I think vice versa as well too. While we're actually building the software, that is a feedback loop of, we're actually validating that, let's say some requirements actually can work. I've definitely worked on software where the requirements are contradictory, where if I build that, then this possibly can't work, and if I build that, this possibly can't work. So having that
when you found that as a developer, did you just keep that under your hat until the next meeting with the analyst?
No, I'm loud and annoying, so I definitely just ran over to the desk and told them. But a lot of times that does happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine all that wasted time in between you discovering that impossibility and actually being able to communicate it to the business analyst. Never mind them, needing to go figure out what to do about it, come back and tell you, and then you could make the change.
Yeah, that was actually just story time. That was one of the first times that I think I've done ensembling, but it was more pairing with the product team. Sat down and was like, all right, if that doesn't work, then how about this? And we actually wrote a unit test or a micro test with them in the room and said, okay, this is the test that proves your requirement is correct. Yeah. Hey, it worked. And that was very powerful because we were using domain-driven design. So the test was actually written in words that they knew. So they were able to read that test and say, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's correct. That rule this should pass. And that was very powerful.
So I think the benefits of having somebody like a business analyst right there to answer your questions or to clarify things, like the business analyst function in my mind is to create a shared understanding of what the work is and what the work isn't, and maybe where our focus should be. So it is kind of obvious the benefits of them being in the room, but I think some of the worries that I've heard from folks like this when we try to get them to join an ensemble, there's a couple of them. There's like, what if I don't understand? What if I'm not technical? What if I don't understand what the developers are talking about? Or when do I do my other work, because I'm on 4, 5 different projects and I have these other things to do. When do I do my look ahead work to groom the backlog?
Yeah, answering your first question, again, a lot of developers do really get into that technical talk, and sometimes there's a time and place for that. But I really do think there is this, like, domain-driven design really aligns with me, where we should actually be talking about our software in the same words that users, other people on the team that aren't developers should understand. So I think there's also a culture change there that can help so that they're not so lost. Like, yeah, we're talking about database schemas maybe, but we're talking about it in the context of this domain thing that they're aware of. And then your second question, which what was it again?
I was talking about, like, when do we do our other projects?
Oh yeah, answer that. There's another fun story I've had where I've actually had the opposite opinion or opposite thing, where a business person has been like, oh, actually, I'll just hide out in the back of the room, work on some other stuff. This way, other people won't schedule me in another meeting where I have to talk about something else, and I can actually get work done and also provide value to you. So kind of a hideaway back when folks were physically located. And that person loved doing that, and it was great.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a mental model mismatch of, like, the way, the traditional way of working and then the ensemble way of working. And for these roles especially, there's a hard fit. Like, either they imagine that they will be sitting there bored to tears because they're not participating in the coding, and maybe just every hour or two there's a thing for them to actually interact with, so they won't be efficient at their work, or they have other work that actually is pulling them away and they can't pay attention and they can't engage in the mob.
I mean, a big part of it too is they're just there. How many times for developers listening, how many times have you working on something and you're like, oh, is that how that works? Oh, well, that person would know. They're not here. Okay.
I'm just going to keep it this way anyway.
Gonna keep working this way. If they're right there, you're gonna be like, hey, is this right? Or if they're there, they'll overhear that question in the first place and their attention will get drawn back to it. That's usually what's happened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would also say, I mean, I found it helpful being an ensemble as a business analyst, even as a QA, in understanding how the developers are approaching the problem and understanding how they're attempting to solve it, because how I write my stories or do my documentation or whatever, I can shift and not have to do so much. So I'm reducing my workload essentially just by being in this meeting. Because then, like, if I'm keeping a backlog, right, I can keep high level stories. I don't have to do these detailed, specific stories. They can actually become placeholders for a conversation at a later date. I don't have to fill them out in detail and manage this ginormous backlog.
Yeah.
Which ends up getting thrown up and thrown out all the time anyway, right?
Yeah.
So
Q1, you just clean up the backlog. That's what everyone does for 2 weeks, right?
just by ensembling, I am reducing my workload significantly. And then exchanging all the different conversations and reporting this out and reporting that out. I don't have to do that.
Yeah, a lot of that big batch, a lot of the heavy lifting that business analysts in particular do when your time span, when you're spreading the work out over months for a single story in with other stories, that work just does kind of vanish when it's like, okay, now is time to do all of the work for this story, BA work included.
Yeah. My risk level too, as a business analyst, drops significantly.
Yeah.
Right? Because I am no longer responsible for having to know everything up front. I've got time to figure things out and actually adjust to how things are going. So my pressure is reduced significantly when I'm ensembling. I have more answers. I have more understanding. I have a better idea of where things are going. It just saves a lot of pressure.
You discover the work by doing the work. It applies not only to the development, but also for all the roles in the development.
Yeah.
In the ensemble.
So what about the technical talk? How do this one I've heard quite a lot from some business analysts I've worked with, is that while the developers are talking about technical stuff, they don't want me in that conversation, or I don't know how to get my point in about what they're working. I can't even tell what they're working on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say part of doing this is the point of that. How many, like, it'll force more communication and more collaboration so that you will be forced to create a shared language.
Yeah.
And maybe at first it will be hard. Developers, there's probably a part of my brain that wants to go to technical jargon just to escape a conversation. But if you're actually seeing the benefits of that collaboration, you'll actually try to create that shared language, that shared space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the developers not wanting to bug the BA, or not wanting, they've got these nagging questions, or tell the BA, hey, you're wrong, right? That same thing exists for the BA, but you've got to be like, have the courage just to be curious about what they're doing. And don't be afraid to ask that question, why? Hey, I don't understand. Why are we doing the logic this way? In my head, it's just got to be open to having the conversation.
Yeah. And I think courage is exactly the right word. There's a courage you have to sort of socially break that barrier. I would also think that a good business analyst already has these skills, because their job entails going out and talking to people who have other subject matter experts and getting them to tell the story of what they need the software to do. This is the same thing, just with your nerds.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, explain it like I'm your mother, or like I'm a nice, 5-year-old person or something. It's like, tell it in human terms, because developers can get wound up in our terminology.
I think, and part of it too also is because we're actually doing instead of talking the entire time, the working software is the best way to communicate.
Yep.
Me and John were writing some code the other day, and we were both in disagreement how we were going about something. And it was literally the same exact line of code that we both wanted to write. But it was just, communication is very hard.
We had different vocabulary.
Yeah, we had different vocabulary, and that's bound to happen. So really, by lowering how much we're talking about, and then actually doing things, and then seeing the results of those things, we're much better able to communicate with each other and
Yeah.
making sure we're going down the right road.
Yeah. Let's talk about the QA because we've talked a lot about the business analyst. Like, what is helpful about the QA being in the room?
One of my favorite things that a good tester will do is participate as early in the creation of a story as possible, a feature in software. They will get in there while we're conceiving of the solution that we're writing and say, here's how it could go wrong. Well, have you thought about this? What about this? They're not sitting there testing the end product on the back end, but they're thinking about all the ways it could break, everything that could go wrong, and they're telling us and helping to, you know, shape our thinking before we've written a single line of code.
Yeah. I think QA has become super important in preventing bugs from even getting into the software. Just like what John was saying, like talking about, you know, what if somebody did this? What if somebody did that?
Yeah.
You know, have we thought about this actually happening? And that can change the whole directory of how we're actually building something.
Yeah. The analogy I like here is development. We're usually trying to focus on the happy path, and even that requires a lot of things in our mental state of the system and how everything will work.
Yeah.
And by having somebody focus more on the exploratory side of, hey, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. It's that metaphor of seeing the forest for the trees. Like it really, like, that has happened to me so many times where I was like, oh wait, yeah, that's correct. Oh, we might actually, maybe we don't tackle that first. Maybe we still get the happy path working, the 99% case. But yeah, that influences our design a little bit. Let's actually put this thing here, and we'll come back and do that later. So we don't even release this feature out to users yet until we've tackled that error case.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I mean, if you think about the tester as this is the only person on the team who can execute tests against the software, you're going to have a bad time. That is a extremely small bottleneck on your process. However, if you take their expertise, that tester, and get them to help everybody on the team think like a tester, or to see the things that are coming and design tests, whether manual or automated, that anybody on the team can execute, then everybody's a tester, and you've cracked that bottleneck wide open.
Yeah.
And you have that dialogue. If they are part of an ensemble, they are not just coming in from outside the team and maybe stress testing an input on your form, like what happens if I put a negative number. That's the entry level of where they would come in. If they have a rich understanding of the domain of the problem you're solving, they will think of more things that can possibly go wrong, and they won't bother with the things that, you know, that they might test that wouldn't be a problem to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the cool things is like, so in ensemble programming, we typically have rotations of drivers, navigators, people asking questions, doing research in the background. Like, what's cool about this is the QA can actually be a driver and or a navigator in this, right? So it's a point in time in that rotation where we can stop and say, okay, QA person, what is it that you're seeing? What is it that you want to take a look at or maybe dive in a little bit deeper on? You know, is there exploratory testing around what we're currently working on or what we've done up to this point that you're iffy on that we need to take a look at? And they can do it themselves while other people are asking them questions, or they can tell somebody else how to actually approach it. So everybody's getting hands-on, and that thought process is starting to churn throughout the entire group.
Yeah. To give folks a clearer understanding of them, let's talk about the mechanics of that. Penny, you talked about rotating and driving. We tend to rotate in a mob, at least among the engineers by default. Every 5 to 10 minutes, a different person is at the keyboard affecting the work. And what we've been doing, at least on the mob that we've been working on with QA and other folks in it, is we actually add them to the rotation. They're not in there writing code. We don't force them into an embarrassing situation that they're not, that they're going to not succeed at necessarily. But during those 5 to 10 minutes, the floor is theirs. They share their screen. Hey, look what I found. Or like you were saying, Penny, that's so they actually get a rotation in with the engineers. Development pauses. We're not typing code in the background while the focus is theirs. They get a turn.
It's about having that shared understanding. So even if it's just, hey, this is what I'm thinking about testing. Here's the things I think could go wrong. That even just gives space for that.
Yeah.
And there's been times too where it's like, you know what, we've already, I don't have anything new since we've last rotated. We'll just skip. And that's totally fine. And I think really the thing we haven't mentioned about this is it really is lowering that feedback loop between what the QAs are thinking about and looking at and finding to the immediacy of the story that's being worked on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no context switching. There's no, oh, do we have to have a bug backlog? No, we're going to actually try to prevent that by thinking about these things beforehand while we're actually building the software.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as a result, you can have, in my experience, a year of development work and maybe 2 or 3 escape defects in that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's I've never experienced that on a project that didn't work like this. Like usually there's, like you say, Cody, there's a bug backlog because we're busy churning out code. Testers are busy, hammering on it and breaking things. And we're all writing, we're all in our own silos, not talking to each other in real time. And so these queues build up.
Yep. And to be honest, I mean, when those queues build up, I mean, the context switching piece, having to go back and attempt to fix things, and you've already moved so far ahead in other things, like it's harder to fix and it's more expensive to fix a bug the further out you are away from when you actually wrote the code that introduced it.
Yeah.
So, finding those bugs when you're actually writing the code is so much easier to deal with when you're actually in the code.
Agreed. And also, like, just one other part about this too. We talk about T-shaped individuals where maybe they have one specialty, but then a generalization. I feel like by adding QA in, the team itself is getting better exploratory testing.
Yeah.
They're, again, seeing the forest for the trees. It really does help to that level of quality where if, they're sick for a day, we've been working with this QA for this much time. Maybe I'll play that role for a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll have that in our mindset.
Yeah. So we're getting close to needing to wrap up, but I did want to talk about one other thing, which is this sounds great, but culturally this can be really hard within an organization. So how do you get QAs and BAs and PMs to join in the mob? And also, how do you sell this to people that think that this is like a ridiculously inefficient way to work?
Well, regarding the last one, I don't think the thing that I find when I'm arguing the efficiency, the effectiveness of ensemble working in any case, usually when I'm debating with somebody on this, I'm talking to a person who's never done it. And there is something about the experience of it that doesn't come across in the description of it. And so first, try to get them into an ensemble that they can observe, that they can see how this works, what it looks like when it's done well. The other thing I would say is don't debate it on principle, get them in there to see it, and let's look at the numbers after we've tried it for a while. Because the numbers will tell the real story. There's a lot of counterintuitive aspects of the productivity of knowledge work. But the main one is that more keyboards don't make it go faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Show versus tell. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's a very with things that don't make any sense, maybe on paper. Show versus tell is a very effective way to have somebody then they have a shared understanding, and then you can have an open dialogue about it.
Yeah.
They'll have that experience. The other thing I wanted to say was it's not exactly the same, but it's sort of similar, are war rooms. when things go wrong, before I wasn't ever ensembled, I was ensembling sort of in a war room, and that did include product. To tell a quick story, we were dealing with an issue where basically our database table, it was so big, we're talking like 2 million or 2 billion rows, and writes started taking more than a minute and a half and started timing out. And basically in our main workflow to where it caused the service to not work. So, oh no, that's not a quick fix either. What do we do? Just stop writing to the database.
Yeah.
So what we did was we got all the developers of the team, the QA and product, and we sat in and we're like, all right, how are we going to fix this? What's the easiest thing we could do to fix this problem? And by having product there, not just development, we could toss ideas out and quickly validate, would that be acceptable? And really just to finish the story, we basically ended up stop writing to the SQL table and started spitting out basically the core of what we actually cared about, which was JSON to S3 in AWS. But it, without having everybody in the room, that decision would have taken a lot longer, and we would have lost way more customer traffic, and it would have been terrible. So I'm sure you have war room experiences. They're usually full of stress, though, and that's why I say it's not a true ensemble experience. It's like slightly adjacent.
No, but you sort of force the mechanic. Like if production is down, well,
Yeah.
that work is serious, and we have to treat it in an immediate way with immediacy and seriousness. Well, why don't we treat all of our work that way?
Yeah.
Good. Well, we don't want the chaos.
Without the stress.
But, yeah, we can deal with the chaos. We have ways.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The other thing I typically have found is it actually makes work a lot more visible when you're working in an ensemble, only because everybody is on the same page. Everybody knows where everybody is at, and everybody can speak to whatever problems, blockers, or issues that are being had, rather than it being one person here and one person there and another person over there. Everybody understands what's actually happening at that point in time.
No more status meetings.
Yes.
Thank you.
No more status.
Those are not fun. I mean, just in general, ensembling does cut down the meeting time a ton because you're not meeting, you're working, which, I mean, we want to talk about efficiency. That sounds a lot more efficient to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also too important is morale of people. Like a lot of people are resistant. They're like, I don't want to work with somebody all day long, and I don't like people looking over my shoulder. But I would say for the most part, people that have ensembled, it actually takes pressure off of them from individual performance and expectations, because it gets shifted to everybody that's in the ensemble, not just one individual of how long it's taking you to get a particular ticket done or something else done.
Yeah, and the conversation switches from, oh, I'm getting my ticket done, to, oh yeah, talking to Bill, the product person. We need to finish this organizational goal so that we could get this thing ready for this conference that's happening in the next month.
Yeah.
So then we have that organizational clarity of why we're trying to do something, so that we feel a lot more responsible and accountable for the success of our product.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and as far as showing your work and like not wanting people to watch you work, there's sort of a shared vulnerability if we're doing this right. If people are just watching you work, you're doing ensembling wrong. That's not ensembling.
True.
But if we're sharing that, if we're rotating frequently, and we are all kind of a little bit vulnerable, there's something in it that reminds me of eating with people, which is a very primally kind of connecting activity. Mm-hmm. We do it to create a connection with people. And we, because, if you go back far enough, eating with people was a vulnerability. Somebody might steal your food. And if you eat with them and they don't steal your food, then that person is safe. Right. And so like, if you work in front of somebody and they don't tear you down completely, and then they turn around and do their work in front of you and you don't tear them down completely, you've got safety. So there's a sort of a safety, behaving yourself aspect to this that bonds a team together too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we are close to time, and I think that's a good thing to wrap up on. So thank you everyone that has joined us. Feel free to reach out to Industrial Logic if you'd like more information on ensembling or just more questions on how to get people involved and communicating across these disciplines and roles, because we think it's super important for you to be able to do that. So thank you all, and we will see you all next week.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.